My parents, James and Laura Hayes, didn't just kick me out penniless. They sealed the deal with a cruelty I'll never forget. "Get out, Clara. You have no future, die out there." That was the moment they signed their own death warrant, though they were far too blinded by arrogance and small-town entitlement to see the legal storm I was about to unleash. It happened on Thanksgiving Day, no less, at what was supposed to be our annual family reunion. Less a reunion and more an annual coronation for my feckless brother Michael. We were in the lavish, overly ornate dining room of their estate in the affluent suburbs of Chicago, the kind of house where the chandeliers cost more than a year's tuition at a state college. The air was thick with the suffocating smell of roasting turkey, Laura's signature overly sweet cranberry glaze, and most potently my mother's insufferable self-satisfaction. I, Clara Hayes, was seated at the far end of the long mahogany table, precisely where I was always placed out of the spotlight. I was the only reason the family diner chain, Hayes Diners, wasn't already a footnote in regional food history. For the past 5 years, I had walked away from a lucrative and punishing career as a high-powered corporate attorney in New York, the kind of job that paid well enough to keep the lights on and the property taxes current on this Chicago monument to bad taste, ironically to come back and stabilize the collapsing business my father was systematically bankrupting. I streamlined operations, renegotiated crippling leases across 19 locations, battled supplier cartels, and most importantly, I kept the IRS audits manageable by meticulously untangling my father's decade of sloppy, self-serving accounting. All this while Michael, my older brother, pursued his 7th failed business venture, a string of financial disasters ranging from a personalized dog treat subscription service to a high-end self-stirring coffee mug distributor, which mostly involved him sitting on their imported Italian sectional, watching ESPN, and complaining loudly about disruptive market trends that inevitably killed his brilliant ideas. The moment of the grand betrayal arrived right after the pumpkin pie was served, but before the espresso machine even had a chance to warm up. Dad James stood up, tapping a sterling silver spoon against his oversized crystal champagne flute. The room quieted every one of the gathered family members, aunts, uncles, cousins, who only cared about the Christmas bonus. Michael and his perpetually bewildered newly pregnant fiancée Sarah, looking expectant. I felt a cold knot tighten in my stomach. I'd been expecting the axe to fall for years, sensing the inevitability of their entitlement, but the sheer public brutality of its swing still tasted like ash in my mouth. Family James announced, his voice booming with forced gravitas, the kind of tone he reserved for firing minimum-wage employees. "I have wonderful news. The future of Hayes Diners is secure. Michael has finally agreed to take over the reins. Michael has the drive, the vision, the charisma we need to take us into the next decade. Effective immediately, he will be our new CEO." A ripple of nervous, obligatory applause went around the table. Sarah beamed, looking like she'd secured her future of unlimited shopping sprees. My mother Laura looked absolutely triumphant, like she'd just won the lottery using Michael's birthday numbers. My face, however, remained a perfect study in quiet, almost unnerving composure. I hadn't moved a muscle, but the entire room, especially the cousins who secretly knew the true financials, knew I had been the de facto CEO for years. Michael, the announced successor, hadn't been to a single restaurant outside of the occasional free lunch, and had spent the last 2 weeks in Vegas on a business trip that smelled suspiciously like a bachelor party gone rogue and bankrolled by the company credit card. I had repeatedly warned James not to issue. I watched Michael lean back in his chair, a smug, entitled grin splitting his face, savoring the moment like the last bite of a perfect steak. He nodded sagely, accepting the praise as if he hadn't just been handed a lifeline made entirely of my sleepless nights, my compromised legal ethics, and my discarded career goals. I decided to address the room, not my father. My voice was calm, measured, cutting through the self-congratulatory murmurs like a shard of ice. I didn't shout. I simply introduced an inconvenient truth. "That's a touching, if financially reckless sentiment, Dad. But let's be factually accurate. Michael hasn't been physically present in a single operating restaurant in 8 months. Save for that unfortunate incident where he tried to redesign the menu graphics with Comic Sans, he hasn't reviewed a P&L statement since the fourth quarter of 2018. Over the last 5 years, I successfully negotiated 5 collective bargaining agreements with the Regional Food Workers Union, lowered our food costs by 18% through strategic supply chain optimization, and secured the crucial $12 million refinancing bank loan that allowed us to open and launch the new highly profitable Boston location. Did you miss those critical bullet points in your announcement, James? Or did you just choose to willfully ignore the one person who kept you out of Chapter 11? The silence that followed was instant and heavy. This wasn't the script. I was supposed to be the quiet, grateful, self-sacrificing daughter who faded into the background while the golden boy took the credit. Instead, I had just read the full transcript of my performance review to a room full of people who thought they were enjoying dessert. Laura, my mother, was the first to attack, standing up with such force that her chair scraped loudly across the polished floor. Her face was a mask of furious, unassailable righteousness. "Don't you dare disrespect your brother, Clara. This is his time. We brought you back because we needed a cleanup crew, nothing more. We saw your job in New York as a failure, a refusal to commit to family. You're good with numbers, and spreadsheets will give you that. But Michael has the vision. He has the charisma. He understands the brand. You have always been difficult, ungrateful, too much of a cynic. We've kept you afloat, given you a home, and this is how you repay us, by throwing shade at your own brother's triumphant moment in front of the entire family." She emphasized, throwing shade, with a dismissive wave of her hand, showing how utterly disconnected she was from modern language and reality. James walked over to me, his jaw tight, his eyes blazing with the humiliation I had publicly inflicted. He reached into the pocket of his bespoke jacket and pulled out a crumpled, almost insultingly small wad of cash. It was a single $20 bill deliberately torn at the corner. He slapped it onto the pristine white tablecloth next to my untouched plate of apple pie. The pathetic gesture, loud in the silence. Here he sneered, his voice low and dangerous, a predatory hiss intended only for me, his discarded worker. "That's severance. You're fired. Get your things, Clara, and get out of my sight. You are toxic to this family and this business. You have always tried to undermine Michael and me. You have no future here, no future out there. Die out there for all I care. We are done with you." The air crystallized. That precise phrase, "die out there," became the anchor of my resolve. It wasn't just dismissal. It was a curse. It was the ultimate final repudiation of my entire existence. My brother Michael just watched, sipping his wine, practically preening at my downfall. They thought they'd finally irrevocably won. They believed they had erased me, but the coldness that washed over me wasn't the panic of despair. It was the immediate, calculated chill of absolute clarity. I had spent years dealing with corporate sharks far more lethal and financially sophisticated than my pathetic parents. I knew how to be calm when the blood was rushing to my ears. I reached into the interior pocket of my well-cut blazer. I didn't pick up the $20. I didn't need their paltry currency. Instead, I pulled out the only non-liquid asset I possessed that belonged solely to me, my late grandmother Amelia's ancient jet black card. It wasn't a standard credit card. It was thick, heavy, made of metal, and completely unmarked save for a tiny, intricately embossed logo of a stylized ram, the sign of Aries, etched near the magnetic strip. My parents and Michael had always mocked it, claiming it was just an old, expired store loyalty card from some forgotten 1980s boutique that Amelia had sentimentally kept. I placed the heavy metal card next to the crumpled $20 bill on the white cloth. I looked directly at Michael, whose face was still shining with smug, undeserved victory. $20, Dad? I said, my voice barely a controlled whisper, yet it somehow sliced through the residual tension and carried across the table. I didn't raise my voice, but the entire room leaned in, sensing a final, catastrophic word. That's what you value 5 years of saving your sorry empire of protecting you from jail time at a torn $20 bill. You know what? Keep your $20. You're going to need it for the commissary when the feds are done with you. I think I'll take my chances with a different kind of currency. I didn't wait for their reactions, which ranged from James's apoplectic rage to Laura's confused, sputtering defense. I pocketed the old black card, stood up without touching my coat, and walked straight out of the dining room. I moved past the stunned guests. Uncle Rick managed a brief apologetic shake of his head and out the front door. I didn't look back at the millions of dollars worth of house, the luxury SUVs in the driveway, or the family who had just disowned me and threatened my life. I just walked. It was brutally freezing. A cruel, cutting Chicago late November wind immediately sliced through the thin wool of my business clothes. I had nothing but the suit on my back, my phone, which was dangerously low on battery, and that ancient, ridiculed black metal card. I had left my purse, keys, and laptop inside, too shocked and too proud to grab them. My entire professional life. The files, the notes, the deep dive analysis of the Hayes Diner's financials was still sitting on my desk in the home office. I walked for what felt like miles, shivering uncontrollably, the expensive steak knife-sharp air of the suburbs mocking my plight. The manicured lawns and silent judgment-filled windows of the million-dollar homes were an echo chamber of my failure to earn my family's respect. Eventually, I hit a main road and found a sleek modern Starbucks, the kind with the open-plan layout, the ubiquitous green logo, and the comforting smell of artisanal coffee mixed with the faint underlying scent of desperation. I needed a triple-shot extra hot latte badly, not just for the warmth, but for the immediate sharp clarity the caffeine would bring to my reeling mind. I checked my pockets. Nothing. I looked at the old black card, the Ram logo looking strangely fierce in the muted interior light. Amelia, my grandmother, had given it to me on my 21st birthday, telling me it was my ultimate emergency fund. She was a strange woman, always secretive, quiet, and passed away quietly a decade ago. I had never used it, never even attempted to. It felt like a bizarre emotional reflex, but I pulled it out. I walked up to the counter, feeling the subtle judgment radiating from the young barista named Liam, who was clearly counting down the minutes until his shift ended. "Just a large black Americano, please. Extra shot in a ceramic mug if you have one." I muttered, my voice hoarse from the cold. The total was $5.25. I swiped the card. The terminal beeped, hesitated, seemed to hold its electronic breath, and then the transaction went through. Approved. I breathed a sigh of relief. It must have been a debit card with $5 left on it, just enough for this one crucial survival tool. At least I had my caffeine, my temporary mental clarity. I moved to the pickup counter, my hands gratefully cupped around the tiny warmth of the ceramic mug, trying to anchor myself back in reality. That's when I saw the commotion. Liam, the barista, was staring wide-eyed at the register receipt, his mouth slightly agape. Next to him, the store manager, a severe-looking woman named Brenda, was on the phone, her hand shaking violently as she spoke in low, urgent, utterly panicked tones. Brenda hung up abruptly, her face utterly ghost-white, her eyes wide with a combination of fear and disbelief. She walked over to me, avoiding Liam, her gaze fixed on the black card I was holding, which I hadn't yet put away. "Ma'am?" she whispered, her voice a strained, panicked gasp. She didn't look like she was about to call security. She looked like she was about to faint or call a priest. "Ma'am, with all due respect, I need you to look at this now." She gently took the discarded transaction slip from the counter and held it out to me. The paper was flimsy, the print faded and cheap, but the number on the authorization line was blindingly clear. It wasn't a balance from a savings account. It was the remaining limit, or perhaps the total balance of the linked trust account, and it made no earthly sense. Balance available, $3,927,455,000.00. I stared at the number. $3.9 billion. It was an impossible number. A ridiculous, life-altering, fake-looking number that only existed in video games or the private journals of the world's true elite. I thought it was a misprint, a prank, or some kind of bizarre high-level corporate loyalty card joke I didn't understand. Brenda, reading my confusion, pointed back toward the register terminal, and then to the heavy black card in my hand, which was now trembling slightly despite my best efforts at control. That's the exact reason the bank's fraud department, the actual official fraud department, not the branch, called me directly. The transaction flagged their highest level alert. That's a prepaid account, ma'am, not a credit line. The system automatically checked the balance because it's never been accessed in a decade. I just got off the phone with Mr. Hawthorne, the head of private banking for the Cayman Islands branch of the issuing entity. He recognized the account number and the Ares security code. He said that card is the primary sole access key to the Ares Legacy Trust Fund. He said, "Ma'am, whoever is holding that card is Amelia Hayes' sole heir, and that account has not been touched in 10 years. The beneficiary is Clara Hayes. Please do not let that person leave the store. We are sending our own specialized security immediately." He said the account holds nearly $4 billion, Clara. $4 billion. I looked from the slip to the black card, then back to the window at the icy, judgmental Chicago street where my parents had just abandoned me. The cold was suddenly gone, replaced by a feverish, hyper-focused, adrenaline-fueled heat that was more effective than any coffee. Die out there. My parents had literally just told me I was worthless, disposable, and cast me into the street with a crumpled $20 and a curse. And all along, I had been sitting on $3.9 billion. They thought they'd won, that they'd successfully neutralized their competent threat. But I didn't just have an ace up my sleeve. I had the entire offshore multi-billion-dollar deck. I calmly took the transaction slip from Brenda's shaking hand and pocketed it. I finished the last sip of my Americano, the bitterness anchoring my senses. "Tell your security team to hold their position, Brenda. Thank you for your professional diligence. And please tell Mr. Hawthorne, the head of private banking, that Clara Hayes will be in touch when I'm ready." That little black card, meant only for a $5.25 latte, just became the primary weapon in my legal arsenal. Their financial death warrant has been signed. That moment changed everything. The game wasn't just over. It had been restarted, and I was now holding all the chips. I was no longer playing the role of the neglected daughter. I was the hostile entity, the corporate predator, the one pulling the financial strings while my parents were still trying to figure out how to pay their December mortgage installment. I was playing three-dimensional chess while they were still struggling with Go Fish. The first call I made wasn't to the panicking bank nor to my family. It was to the only person I trusted, absolutely a professional equal, Jack Sterling. Jack wasn't just my friend. He was the best corporate finance lawyer I'd ever worked with, a former colleague from my days at the prestigious firm of Skadden Arps in NYC, now running his own highly specialized advisory firm in the upscale Dallas Arts District. "Clara, you sound like you're calling from the Arctic tundra. Happy Thanksgiving." Jack answered, his voice easygoing, laced with a familiar, soothing Texas drawl. "They fired me, Jack," I said, my voice flat, devoid of the emotion I was desperately suppressing. "My mother called me a drain on the family's image, and my father told me to die in the street after throwing $20 at me. They gave the entire diner chain, the one I just saved from insolvency, to Michael, who, as we both know, couldn't successfully manage a high school bake sale." A sharp intake of breath on the other end. "You are dead serious. I knew James was an idiot, but that's a new level of idiocy even for him. You literally saved that entire business, Clara. Where are you right now?" "Chicago. In a high-end coffee shop. And this is the part where you might want to sit down and maybe grab a strong whiskey." I continued, taking a slow, controlled sip of the coffee to anchor myself in the surreal reality. I swiped my grandmother's ancient black metal card, the one they always mocked. "Balance available, $3.9 billion. I need you to confirm if I'm finally having the psychotic break I've deferred for years, or if I just became a hostile bidder for a significant portion of the global financial market." Jack didn't laugh. He was silent for a long moment, then I heard the rapid, unmistakable, furious sound of a keyboard being pounded. Jack, confirming the bank's panic call on his own network. "Hold on. You're telling me Amelia Hayes?" The woman who wore the same tweed coat for 20 years refused all phone contact and lived in that tiny, dilapidated bungalow near the old train tracks. She had a B with 9 zeros. His professionalism was momentarily cracked by sheer incredulous awe. Apparently, yes. The bank is in utter meltdown. They're calling it the Ares Legacy Trust Fund. And Jack, I need you to find every piece of legal documentation related to that account quietly. I need to know how airtight the trust is, and more importantly, how fast I can liquidate enough capital to hire every specialist we need. Okay, don't move. Don't talk to anyone. Especially not the bank or your family yet, Jack commanded, his voice now, switching from casual friend to the laser-focused intensity of high-stakes legal counsel. This changes the entire landscape. Give me 48 hours. I'm canceling my flight to Bali and chartering a jet to Chicago tonight. I'll meet you at the peninsula tomorrow morning. Get yourself a cab and check in under a fake name, something appropriately boring like Jane Smith or Eleanor Rigby. You are officially a ghost now, Clara. A very, very wealthy ghost, with the power to vaporize your parents' entire existence. I followed his instructions precisely. Checking into the Peninsula Hotel, seeing the doorman open the door for me felt like stepping into an alternate universe. I sat in the luxurious, absurdly oversized suite looking out over the glittering, indifferent Chicago skyline, the heavy black card resting on the mahogany desk like a silent, powerful talisman. It was cold and represented everything my family had scorned me for: my quiet competence, my relationship with Amelia, and most importantly, my true, hidden, unimaginable value. The next morning, I knew exactly what I had to do. The idea of revenge wasn't just a fleeting, satisfying thought. It was a deep, cold, and utterly necessary certainty. They didn't just hurt me emotionally. They committed a financial and ethical crime against the hundreds of people who relied on Hayes Diners. Now I had the resources to not only seek justice for myself, but for everyone they had preyed upon. Jack arrived bringing with him Emma Vance, a forensic accountant and white-collar crime specialist whose reputation was legendary for taking down corrupt politicians and crooked executives. Emma was sharp, meticulous, and had a reputation for finding money where lawyers claimed there was none. We set up our war room in the Peninsula Suite. The first 2 days were a deep forensic dive into the Ares legacy. The money was absolutely real. Amelia Hayes, my seemingly impoverished, eccentric grandmother, hadn't been broke. She had been brilliant, ruthless, and decades ahead of the curve. She had secretly sold off her initial massive stake in a small pre-IPO tech company in Silicon Valley in the early 1990s, the one company James had always dismissed as a nerdy hobby, for hundreds of millions. She had then funneled the money through a complex web of offshore trusts and holding companies, the main one being Ares Legacy Corp., shielding it entirely from James and Laura's financial oversight and subsequent demands. She had lived a quiet, observed life, a silent sentinel observing her pathetic, grasping family from a distance. The trust documents meticulously crafted by Linda Chen decades ago were airtight. They specified that the entire fortune and the holding company's structure went exclusively to me, Clara Hayes, upon my 30th birthday, provided I had not accepted any direct documented financial gifts or employment contracts from James or Laura Hayes in the preceding 5 years. My grandmother, it turned out, had seen their true colors far better than I had correctly anticipating that my parents would exploit my talents until I finally broke free. The only reason the money had sat dormant for 2 years past my 30th birthday was that I had never tried to use the card, my emergency fund, until the precise climactic moment I was truly desperate and utterly abandoned. She knew, Clara, Jack said, leaning back in the plush chair, tapping the dense leather-bound legal binder that held the trust documents. She knew they'd try to bankrupt you, steal your energy, or cast you out when you became a liability to Michael's vision. She set up the perfect escape clause, the ultimate vindication. A multi-billion-dollar Wems told you so. Fund accessible only when they discarded you completely. The realization hit me harder than the expulsion itself. Amelia had been my silent, distant protector, orchestrating my salvation from beyond the grave. My debt to her was profound, and the best way to honor her legacy was to finally expose the toxic rot she had tried to shield me from. This wasn't just about financial retribution, it was about spiritual and moral closure. My past quickly came back into sharp, painful focus, emphasizing the scale of the sacrifices I had made and the systematic, crushing favoritism I endured. Growing up in our comfortable but deeply dysfunctional household in suburban Texas before Dad decided we needed to be closer to Chicago for the diner HQ, it was always Michael first. Michael, who couldn't remember to take out the trash or successfully manage a budget, but he was hailed as a creative genius and the people person. Michael, whose elementary school art project, a lopsided clay model of a hot dog, was framed above the fireplace for 10 years, while my high school valedictorian trophy and my acceptance letters to every Ivy League school I applied to were relegated to a dusty shelf in the basement, constantly referred to by Laura as Clara's dusty academic relics. I had always been the designated competent one, the utility player. If something needed to be done, the bills paid, the taxes organized, a particularly thorny legal loophole found in Dad's business contracts, it fell to me. When I got into Yale Law, my father's only comment was, "Good, you can help Michael vet his contracts. He has a lot of big ideas." When I landed the job at Skadden Arps, one of the most prestigious law firms in the country, Laura's only reaction was, "It's a shame you won't be around to drive Michael to his auditions. New York is too far." The message was clear. My achievements were only valuable insofar as they could serve Michael's ego or the family's convenience. 5 years ago, the call came. James sounded genuinely panicked. His voice cracked over the phone, pleading with me to quit my life, my partnership track, and save the family business. I threw away my trajectory, the one I had worked relentlessly to build, working 80-hour weeks fueled by caffeine and the promise of making a real ethical difference in the legal world, to manage a chain of 19 perpetually struggling greasy spoon diners. I reorganized their debts, fought off a potentially crippling unionization effort, which Dad had provoked through abysmal pay and illegal practices, and introduced modern cost-saving POS and tech solutions. I personally spent 2 years managing the details of the $12 million bank loan refinancing, making sure every clause was airtight, signing off on collateral that was worth more than the loan itself. Michael, meanwhile, was given a $500,000 startup fund for a crypto-based dog-walking app that lasted 6 weeks before he accidentally lost the seed money in a phishing scam. The disparity was not just unfair, it was structurally, foundationally cruel. They systematically relied on my competence to support Michael's incompetence, and when I stopped being useful, they cut me loose with $20. The true nature of their betrayal, however, transcended emotional neglect and professional theft. It began to emerge as Emma and I, leveraging the undeniable weight of the Ares legacy funds, dug into the financials of Hayes Diners, using the leverage of the billions to access the best forensic specialists and private investigators in the country. "Clara, this isn't just bad management or sloppy accounting," Emma said, pushing a printed wire diagram across the table late one night. We were surrounded by monitors in the Peninsula suite, now littered with financial printouts, legal binders, and empty takeout containers. "Your father hasn't just been running the business into the ground, he's been running a shadow operation for years. Look at these employee pension funds, specifically the Hayes Employee 401k managed portfolio." I leaned in, feeling a sickening coldness in my gut. James, with Laura's complicity, had convinced all regional employees, from the kitchen staff in Texas to the waitresses in the Boston location, to transition their small local 401k accounts into a new family-managed retirement plan offering supposedly higher guaranteed returns. It was an illegal bait and switch. "He's not investing it, Clara. He's looting it," Emma explained, her voice sharp with professional disgust. "The managed portfolio has been a personal slush fund since 2017. Look at the investment dates. They correlate exactly with the payments for Michael's failed dog treat venture, the down payment on the new ski house in Vale, Sarah's ridiculously expensive engagement ring, and even the payments for Laura's cosmetic surgeries. We're talking about $3 million diverted from over 200 employee accounts. This isn't mismanagement. It's criminal misappropriation of funds on a grand-scale federal wire fraud and massive deliberate tax evasion that will bring the entire weight of the IRS and the Department of Labor down on them. It was the final devastating piece of the puzzle. The realization that they hadn't just mistreated me, they were deeply fundamentally corrupt, and my honest work for the past 5 years, my meticulous bookkeeping and loan management was the only thing preventing their entire criminal enterprise from being caught. The $20 Dad tossed at me was not just an insult. It was their desperate final attempt to remove the last vestige of moral and financial clarity from their sinking criminal ship. We don't just have grounds for revenge. Jack, I stated, my lawyer persona fully engaged, the $3.9 billion suddenly feeling less like a burden and more like a righteous tool. We have grounds for immediate, irreversible conviction, and we're not going to let them off with a complicated civil suit that drains my trust funds. We're going to hit them where it counts the most: their freedom, their carefully curated legacy, and Michael's entire pathetic, entitled future. My plan became meticulous, intelligent, and deeply satisfying, designed to dismantle their power, strip their assets, and deliver them directly into the hands of the federal government. It was a three-pronged attack utilizing my new wealth and my dormant legal expertise. Prong 1. The corporate hostile takeover, legal and financial dismantling. Using Ares Legacy's liquid capital, I established 3 new holding companies in Delaware. Through these shell corporations, I quietly purchased all outstanding long-term and short-term debt on the Hayes Diners chain from the various regional banks, often paying a premium to accelerate the process. This maneuver instantly made me the sole, primary, and most powerful creditor. The moment I controlled the debt, Jack's firm initiated a formal legal action to replace the executive management, James and Michael, with an independent court-appointed trustee, citing overwhelming evidence of financial malfeasance, fiduciary irresponsibility, and impending insolvency. This was a purely corporate move, designed to remove their power legally and irrevocably, without giving them grounds to challenge the ownership structure, all before the criminal hammer fell. The process was swift, cold, and devastatingly legal. I wasn't just taking their company, I was removing their ability to conduct any further business. Prong 2. The asset freeze and psychological warfare. Personal and immediate. Working simultaneously with Jack's team and a high-end private investigation firm, we used the pending corporate suit and the overwhelming documentation of fraud to obtain an immediate ex parte restraining order on all personal non-business assets belonging to James, Laura, and Michael. The Chicago mansion, the 3 luxury SUVs, the Vail ski house, Michael's ridiculous collection of expensive Swiss watches, their offshore accounts. Everything was immediately subject to a temporary freeze. They couldn't sell them, leverage them for legal fees, or even draw a significant amount of cash. The goal was to force them into immediate cash liquidity crisis. I wanted them to feel the paralyzing, desperate financial panic I had felt on the street, magnified by several $1 million of sudden, utter powerlessness. A key detail in this prong was Michael's attempt to circumvent the freeze. He had attempted to wire $50,000 from a secondary checking account to a third-party relative in Florida, claiming it was a loan repayment. Our team, already monitoring their financial footprints through court-approved disclosure, intercepted the attempt, and the transaction was immediately flagged and blocked. The subsequent legal filing we made detailing Michael's attempt to move assets after the injunction only deepened the legal hole they were digging for themselves. Prong 3. The federal dossier, the ultimate payload and public exposure. This was the core of the strategy, the masterpiece that turned a family feud into a federal case. Emma, with her forensic precision, assembled a 300-page dossier detailing every forged document, every improper wire transfer from the 401k accounts, and the resulting massive tax evasion, complete with spreadsheets, bank statements, and annotated email exchanges. I personally reviewed every page, adding legal context and ensuring absolute infallibility, cross-referencing every law they broke. Once complete, Jack's firm anonymously submitted the massive, perfectly organized packet to the appropriate division of the IRS and the FBI's white-collar crime unit in Chicago. The evidence was so overwhelming, organized, and clearly indicative of systematic fraud against ordinary citizens that it was impossible to ignore. This wasn't a mere tip. It was a ready-made, professionally prosecuted case on a silver platter. While we executed the plan, I had my first highly anticipated confrontation with my parents. It happened 3 weeks after Thanksgiving, not at the family home, but at the sleek minimalist office of their new lawyer, a mid-tier guy named Mr. Peterson in downtown Chicago, clearly hired because their funds were already being tightly restricted and they couldn't afford a high-end defense firm. James and Laura walked in looking tense, gaunt from sleepless nights, but still clinging desperately to their misplaced sense of superiority. Michael was there too, fidgeting, nervously checking his non-existent bank balance on his phone. They expected me to be contrite, maybe begging for a settlement. They expected the emotional, desperate daughter. I walked in with Jack Sterling and Emma Vance. I was wearing an impeccably tailored black suit sourced from a rapid, quiet shopping trip using the Aries card. My hair was pulled back into a severe professional knot. I carried an Italian leather briefcase that cost more than their entire Thanksgiving dinner. I looked every inch the formidable, ice-cold corporate lawyer I used to be, but now I was bankrolled by $1 billion war chest. Clara darling, my mother began attempting a brittle, manipulative smile that didn't reach her eyes. We are so glad you came to your senses. This whole thing is ridiculous. Now about that ancient card and this ridiculous lawsuit. It's not that card, Laura. It's the primary access key to the Aries Legacy Trust, an offshore entity containing approximately $3.9 billion USD, which according to my grandmother's legally ironclad trust documents is entirely and exclusively mine. I interrupted, my voice perfectly level, devoid of any warmth. The temperature in the room instantly dropped. James's face went from pale to purple in an instant. That's impossible. Amelia died broke. She lived like a pauper. It's a trick, a forgery. He sputtered, his voice cracking with disbelief and rising panic. The Cayman Bank says otherwise, James. And trust me, they care less about your parental denial than they do about federal banking regulations and the security of a multi-billion-dollar trust. I shot back, meeting his gaze without flinching. Then I dropped the first real physical bombshell. Jack slid a thick, meticulously organized legal document across the mahogany table. It wasn't a settlement. It was the final, non-appealable injunction permanently freezing their personal assets. As of this morning, your home, the cars, the boat, and Michael's cryptocurrency portfolio are all subject to a permanent restraining order pending the resolution of the corporate suit, I explained, watching the color drain from Laura and Michael's faces. The suit alleges chronic financial malfeasance and fiduciary irresponsibility in the management of Hayes Diners, culminating in the complete disregard of all advice from the COO, that's me, and placing the company at risk of immediate collapse. I am now officially the largest secured creditor. You can't even sell the silverware to pay your lawyer, James. Michael finally spoke, his voice sputtering with frantic, childish indignation. You can't do that. That's illegal. That house is Dad's inheritance. It was purchased using company funds improperly transferred, Michael. And unlike you, I know exactly what's illegal and what isn't. I wrote the legal opinion on the initial loan agreement, remember, I said, staring him down. You messed with the wrong daughter. You thought you were dealing with the person who managed your schedules and fixed your amateur mistakes. You were wrong. You're dealing with the person who wrote the compliance memos you ignored. This is just the beginning. I gave you 5 years of my life to save you from yourselves, and you repaid me by telling me to die in the street. Now you're going to pay interest on every single sacrifice I made. Laura collapsed back into her chair, the fragile mask of confidence finally shattering. James, do something, call someone, this is a nightmare. James was speechless, staring at the document. He knew enough about the legal world to understand the gravity of an asset freeze and a permanent injunction. Their arrogance was replaced by raw, frantic, sickening fear. They were finally realizing the true depth of their miscalculation. They had taken on a trained killer armed with billions, and all they had was a mid-tier lawyer and a rapidly shrinking legal fund. The next few weeks were a blur of intense, cold legal action, all orchestrated from my temporary, luxurious headquarters in the Chicago high-rise. I didn't return calls from cousins who suddenly remembered I existed, or family friends who offered to mediate. I didn't waste energy on social media battles, though Michael tried to spill the tea on Instagram and Facebook, claiming I was mentally unstable and trying to steal the family fortune. Jack and Emma managed the narrative, releasing only highly vetted neutral corporate speak information about the forced restructuring of Hayes Diners due to critical executive oversight failure and significant debt acquisition. The focus remained squarely on the federal dossier. It was the silver bullet, the ultimate weapon. The 401k theft was the crucial component. It turned a complex, messy civil suit into a major, clear-cut criminal case involving 200 victims, a case that the feds couldn't ignore, especially since it involved the retirement funds of hundreds of hard-working, ordinary Americans. This struck at the core of the American value system, stealing from the working class to fund a privileged, decadent lifestyle. My only true support during this time came from Jack, Emma, and Amelia's long-term lawyer, Linda Chen. Linda was a sharp, formidable woman in her 70s who had managed the Ares Legacy Trust for decades and was a true mentor in the world of high finance. Linda confirmed that Amelia had purposefully structured the trust this way, predicting exactly this scenario. She wasn't just wealthy, Clara. She was clairvoyant. She knew you were the only one with integrity, the only one who didn't crave their approval. And she knew that to fight them, to win back your life, you'd need power greater than theirs. She just made sure you were armed to the teeth. One late, quiet afternoon, sitting in the office, I found an old, faded, typed letter from Amelia attached to the original trust documents. It was dated 5 years ago, written precisely when I walked away from my partnership track to save my parents' business. Clara, my dear girl, I see what you're doing. You're trying to earn their love, but you can't earn what they don't possess. They are empty vessels. You are sacrificing your brilliant light to keep their dim, faulty candle lit. Don't do it for them. Do it for the employees, for the business that deserves better, and for yourself. The money is there when you need it. Use it wisely, not just for power, but for justice. Sometimes, the most charitable thing you can do for a rotten family is expose the rot. Let the sun shine on the corruption and let the system clean it out. I always knew you would find this card when you needed it most. I'm proud of the woman you became in spite of them. Now go be the woman you were always meant to be. Love, Amelia. Reading that letter, I didn't feel rage anymore. I felt an overwhelming sense of profound vindication, purpose, and connection to a lineage of quiet strength. My revenge wasn't personal. It was institutional. It was about restoring justice and stolen retirement savings to the people my family had preyed on, the hard-working staff of Hayes Diners, whose pensions they had used to fund Michael's failed lifestyle and Laura's relentless consumption. The civil lawsuit was a formality, moving quickly toward the final corporate takeover, and the family was struggling intensely. They had burned through what little liquid capital they had left on Peterson, who was quickly realizing he was dangerously out of his depth. James tried to appeal the asset freeze personally, writing rambling, legally unsound letters to the judge. He failed spectacularly. Laura tried to call in favors with old friends, prominent figures in their suburban social circle. They all conveniently had full voicemail boxes and even fuller diaries, not wanting to touch the rapidly spreading Hayes scandal. Michael, desperate, tried to pawn some of his custom golf clubs and realized they were subject to the injunction, leading to a loud public meltdown in the pawnshop's parking lot that was caught on security camera footage. They were cornered, financially gutted, panicked, and starting to turn on each other, which was the final satisfying component of my strategy, isolating the cancer until it consumed itself. The phone calls started with increased frequency. Michael called first, weeping, demanding I give him access to just a little cash for Sarah, claiming I was ruining his life and the reputation of the Hayes name. Reputation, I thought, a cold laugh catching in my throat. I didn't pick up. Then Laura called, alternating wildly between aggressive demands, gaslighting, and weepy, manipulative pleading. "Clara, you have to stop this. You are tearing the family apart. Your father is literally sick with stress. You'll kill him. Are you really going to destroy your own blood over an old ridiculous card and a misunderstanding?" She wailed into the voicemail. My reply, delivered via email, was concise, cold, and final, straight from my old corporate law playbook. "The destruction of the family was completed on Thanksgiving Day, when you and James instructed me to be out there. I am merely observing the logical, professional, and legal consequences of your actions. As CEO, I am focused on the fiduciary duty to the company and its employees, not the emotional demands of its former criminal management. All future communication must be through Jack Sterling's office. Do not contact me again, or I will file for an additional harassment injunction." The final civil hearing for the permanent replacement of executive management was set for a Monday morning in the U.S. District Court in Chicago. It was a formal motion to permanently install a new trustee to manage Hayes Diners, essentially stripping James and Michael of all control. But before that hearing could even start, the federal government, specifically the Department of Justice's Economic Crimes Division, working alongside the IRS, had decided the 401k theft and wire fraud case was simply too strong, too organized, and too easily prosecuted to wait for civil court resolution. The entire team, Jack, Emma, and I, were gathered in the penthouse suite overlooking Lake Michigan, monitoring news feeds and secure communication lines. We had done our part. The final domino just needed a small federal push. The morning started like any other, but I felt a coiled tension deep in my stomach. I was dressed in a tailored suit, ready to appear in court, but I knew with the cold certainty of a seasoned prosecutor that I wouldn't need to. At 9:02 a.m., Emma pointed to a flashing headline on her screen: "FBI executes warrants at prominent Chicago business and suburban home. Corporate fraud suspected." The climax was sudden, brutal, and widely televised. I watched the live footage on a silent loop on one of the large screens in the war room. The camera was shaky, clearly feed from a local news helicopter buzzing annoyingly over the quiet suburb. It focused relentlessly on the lavish Hayes suburban estate, the same house where just weeks earlier I had been cast out like trash, the $20 bill mocking my integrity. The front lawn was now swarming with dark-suited FBI agents and IRS investigators. A phalanx of official vehicles, unmarked black SUVs, and distinctive police cruisers blocked the circular driveway. My mother's prized azaleas, which she manicured with obsessive care, were being ruthlessly trampled underfoot by federal agents. It was swift, poetic justice delivered on a massive federal scale. A few minutes later, the live feed switched to the corporate offices of Hayes Diners downtown. Agents were methodically carrying out boxes marked evidence, seizing computers, and escorting bewildered low-level executives out of the building. James Hayes. My father was brought out in a rumpled suit, his face utterly ravaged, the usual air of forced superiority completely evaporated, replaced by the sheer naked terror of a cornered animal realizing its life is over. He tried to resist, muttering something about his rights to the agents, but they efficiently secured him in a vehicle. The news anchor was speaking with breathless urgency. "This appears to be a coordinated raid across multiple locations linked to the Hayes Diners chain. Sources confirm the charges are extremely serious, involving potential misappropriation of employee retirement funds and significant tax fraud." But the most dramatic, soul-satisfying moment came when the news feed cut back to the home. The anchor was reporting live as Laura Hayes, still in a hastily thrown-on silk robe and clutching a small yapping dog, was brought out by two agents. She was screaming not in anger but in pure animal panic and disbelief, her voice a high-pitched shriek even through the helicopter's static. She fought the agents, clawing at their arms, her expensive engagement ring and wedding band flashing grotesquely in the morning sun. Laura Hayes being taken into custody now. Initial reports confirm multiple counts related to long-term corporate fraud, tax evasion, and felony misappropriation of employee retirement funds. Her husband, James Hayes, the CEO of Hayes Diners, was arrested moments ago at his office. The reporter declared, her voice heavy with the gravity of the event. Then came the final crushing blow. Michael was brought out looking like a disheveled little boy who had just been caught stealing cookies. His face was tear-streaked, confused, and utterly shocked. He kept shouting at the agents that it was a misunderstanding, that he was the new CEO, and that his mentally unstable sister had set them up. An agent firmly guided him toward a waiting unmarked car. As the cuffs clicked onto Laura's wrists, the sound of metal on metal was somehow visceral. Even on the muffled broadcast, she didn't just stumble. She collapsed completely onto the wet lawn, a desperate broken figure, her silk robe billowing around her. James, being loaded into a separate car downtown, happened to look up at the hovering helicopter camera, and in that precise final moment of clarity, he realized who had done this. He pointed frantically at the lens, his face contorted in absolute incandescent rage and betrayal. Clara. It was Clara. She did this. She's a fraud. A lunatic. He screamed, his voice shattering in the morning air, captured by the high-powered microphone and broadcast live across the entire city. I watched the screen, the image of his screaming, impotent face filling the space before me. My hands resting on the desk were perfectly steady. The triumph was not loud. It was quiet, deep, and final. There it is, I whispered, turning to Jack and Emma, the weight of years of neglect finally lifting, the last desperate act of their pathetic drama. I think we can skip the civil hearing, Jack. The government just took care of our deposition. And Emma, please ensure that clip of James screaming my name gets archived and saved. It's for posterity. Justice served Clara. On a platter of federal warrants and a live news feed, Jack replied, a genuine, satisfied smile touching his lips. He looked at me no longer just a friend or colleague, but a partner in a massive, ethically justified corporate demolition. The immediate aftermath was pure media chaos, but for me, it was quiet, organized, and focused liberation. The civil case was instantly dropped. The federal government's criminal charges took absolute precedence. Hayes Diners was swiftly seized by the government to stabilize its assets, but since I held all the debt and had proven fiduciary competence beyond reproach, my own dossier was now with the court, and I was quickly appointed the court-approved trustee and interim CEO, using the strategic funds of the Aries legacy to stabilize the company and, more importantly, restore the stolen pension funds. My first act as the new legitimate leader of the organization was to address the 200 employees. I held a company-wide town hall streamed live to all 19 locations, from the deep-fried heart of the Texas branch to the busy counter in the new Boston diner. I didn't mince words or attempt to whitewash the history. For years, you were served by a corrupt management team who systematically stole your hard-earned retirement savings to fund their extravagant, unnecessary lifestyles. That stops today, permanently. Every single dollar illegally taken from the 401k and pension accounts will be meticulously restored with comprehensive interest using the resources of the Hayes Family Trust, which I now control. I know this doesn't make up for the profound violation and betrayal, but it is the first crucial step toward building an ethical, honest, and successful business, one based on the hard work of people like you, not the fraudulent schemes of people like them. The response was overwhelming, a tidal wave of gratitude and relief. My vindication wasn't just the arrests. It was the hundreds of emails and messages I received from the employees thanking me, sharing their relief, and promising their unwavering loyalty. They were the true forgotten victims, and helping them felt infinitely more satisfying than watching my parents and brother go to jail. The next year was dedicated to my complete self-reconstruction and the radical restructuring of the business. I immediately rebranded the entire chain to Amelia's Table, a nod to the only person in my family who ever believed in me and provided the means for justice. I hired an entirely new, deeply ethical management team, sold the ridiculously overpriced Chicago mansion. The proceeds went directly into a general business fund and the employee hardship fund and established a clear, transparent corporate governance structure that mirrored the best practices I had learned on Wall Street. I used my legal and financial skills not just to heal the business, but to fundamentally redesign its core identity around honesty and employee welfare. We introduced a new menu concept focusing on quality, locally sourced ingredients, a massive shift from the cheap processed food James had relied on. The Boston location, which I had saved, became the testing ground for the new successful model. I also embraced the vast potential of the Aries legacy fully. I moved back to New York City, purchasing a beautiful, airy penthouse overlooking Central Park, a silent, luxurious middle finger to the family who thought I would die out there. I established the Amelia Hayes Foundation, dedicated specifically to supporting victims of corporate and family financial fraud, funding high-end legal aid and forensic accounting services for those who could never afford it. I channeled my billions into meaningful ethical work, building something truly magnificent out of the rubble of my family's greed and betrayal. The Ram logo, once a mysterious mark on a card, became the symbol of my new corporate identity, fierce-driven and uncompromising. Jack Sterling, who had become much more than just a colleague or strategic partner, was instrumental in this transition. Our working relationship had deepened into something quiet, strong, and deeply collaborative, founded on mutual respect and shared ethical lines. He wasn't just impressed by the audacity of my revenge. He was in awe of my unwavering commitment to integrity and restorative justice. We often shared late-night working sessions in my Manhattan penthouse that ended with a quiet dinner and a shared bottle of fine Napa Valley wine, discussing not just corporate strategy, but the future we were slowly, deliberately building together. He had seen me at my absolute lowest, shivering in a Starbucks, and at my most powerful, watching the FBI raid on my screen. He knew my core, and he loved it. 8 months after the arrests, James, Laura, and Michael were sentenced in a high-profile federal case. The federal judge, citing the extreme callousness of the 401k theft against low-wage service industry workers, handed down substantial non-negotiable sentences, 20 years each for James and Laura, and 10 years for Michael, who was deemed a complicit beneficiary who benefited directly from the fraud. The Hayes name, once synonymous with a failing regional diner chain, was now permanently synonymous with corporate greed and federal prison. One crisp October afternoon, a year after the Thanksgiving betrayal, Jack and I were sitting in a quiet, sun-drenched cafe in the West Village, far from the frenetic intensity of our respective offices. I was naturally drinking a large black Americano, but this one tasted of victory, not desperation. "So what's the next chapter, Queen Midas?" Jack asked, stirring his coffee, his eyes warm and approving. I smiled, a genuine, relaxed smile that had taken years to earn. The foundation is growing, helping dozens of families every quarter. Amelia's table is profitable, ethical, and expanding responsibly. We just signed a lease for our first San Francisco location. The next step is launching the Aries Capital Group. I want to use the trust fund's vast liquidity to invest only in companies with strict, transparent ethical governance and strong labor practices. We're going to prove that you don't have to be corrupt to be profitable. In fact, we're going to show that ethical practice is the only sustainable path to massive long-term success. We're going to change the rules of the game for good. A new career, a new life, a global empire, and a new world, all built from a $5 coffee swipe, Jack mused, raising his mug in a toast. I met his gaze, the quiet strength in his eyes mirroring my own resolve. They taught me the meaning of true betrayal, Jack. They tried to break me, they tried to erase me. But in doing so, they gave me the greatest gift of all, the absolute, unassailable freedom to pursue justice without their shackles. They wanted me to die out there penniless and alone, but instead, I was reborn armed with the legacy of the only honest person in my family and the resources to ensure that every crime, every single act of cruelty was answered with justice. And I had the last laugh, a very, very expensive, well-deserved laugh. I clinked my ceramic mug against his, the sound surprisingly final. I was free, powerful, and finally completely myself. I had traded a life of servitude for a destiny of my own making, the cold Chicago street a distant motivating memory replaced by the boundless glittering promise of a life rebuilt with billions integrity and absolute justice. I took my shot and rebuilt my life brick by billion-dollar brick, and the view from the top of the New York skyline had never looked clearer. The Aries Ram was finally home,